first bill I'd like to talk about is the Extreme Protection Order bill. I'd like to state my objection to this bill. Before I get into the objection, I'd like to thank the RIACLU for their analysis on this bill, detailing the lack of due process and intrusive powers it enabled. When reading this bill, I was immediately concerned with Section 8313, the liability section. I'm worried that government agencies will be entrusted with determining someone's ability to exercise a civil right. The potential for mistakes and abuse by courts and law enforcement is tremendous. Let's all be honest, their track record on protecting civil liberties is less than stellar. Why is there no criminal or civil liability for acts relating to false statements or omissions that are made under oath in the affidavit section? Why is there no remedy for these violations by the state? To ensure accountability in the courts and law enforcement, any perjury or blatant omissions must be treated as a civil rights violation, and the injured party should be able to file criminal charges or seek civil penalties. Will the belief that government can't be trusted to protect my rights label me as mentally ill? Are anti-authoritarians mentally ill? From what I hear from some mainstream politicians, it is, and they are. How far have these ideas permeated the justice and legal system? Will people's sanity be judged based on political beliefs? Will laws like this stifle free speech due to the fear of people being labeled mentally ill? Where does this insanity stop? Will we limit people's right to vote or exercise free speech based on judgments from law enforcement? Will we revoke driver's licenses and confiscate vehicles on hearsay without due process? I say this because that's what I see in that bill. I see violations of due process for the future. I see it violating civil liberties later on, being used, you know, if it works for guns, it may work for free speech. It may work for other civil liberties. Another thing I'd like to touch on, I'd like to talk about gun control in general. I understand that it's uncomfortable for many people to imagine a time where the people would have to raise arms against their own government. But the reality is, that's the idea behind the Second Amendment. If we want to look at statistics, and I heard a lot of statistics tonight, we need to look no further than democide. It's basically responsible for 123 million murders in the 20th century, and that's death by government. I'd like to read an article written by a prominent Rhode Island politician in 2005 entitled "The Right to Overthrow." This gentleman was not a gun owner, but I believe he understood the idea behind the Second Amendment better than most people. And he actually ran for governor. I may be on the wrong end of the gun debate, but I'm still bringing a knife to this gunfight. My position is that the Second Amendment does not relate to guns, but it has a far more visionary intent: revolution. To me, the argument that the Second Amendment is about guns completely misses the target. The Second Amendment is about the right to pick up a pitchfork, sword, or gun to either protect or restore our rights against tyrannical government. And oddly enough, tyrannical governments do not interpret this similarly. The colonists haven't survived a bout of tyranny, were in no mood to be restricted. Guns were as commonplace as spoons and necessary for daily existence. They were a daily tool, not explicitly mentioned in the Second Amendment. Has anyone proposed any good hammer amendments recently? At the founding, tyranny was a real threat. Retaining a right to keep arms, to rise up against government, is far more logical as the foundation of the Second Amendment. While we can debate whether we need to preserve or expand our Second Amendment right of revolution, the idea has been postulated for most of the 20th century that the Second Amendment is to protect or regulate guns is misguided. Whatever side you're on, gun control or gun ownership, you are wrong to think that the Second Amendment is your problem or your savior. The real issue is the change in society and how this relates to the Second Amendment. The deinstitutionalization of America in the 1960s put thousands on the street based on the theory that one is insane only if the person is dangerous to himself or others, usually proven after a mass murder. While deinstitutionalization was a victory for personal freedom and humanity, the downside is that the state, freed of its commitment to mentally deficient, failed to provide support on the outside for those released from the inside. Mass shootings, often the work of the certifiably insane, trigger a debate about gun control under the Second Amendment, when it really should initiate a discussion on how our society fails its mentally deficient. Having potentially insane people among us can be dangerous, as it was back then. Guns are an easy means for the insane to vent their frustrations. But is it the solution to take away guns, or to better care for our mentally unstable? Is your answer for us to submit to more tyranny because we are allowing more freedoms? Do we still fight wars for peace? Now, there's a slight explicit, swear in here, so I'm going to bleep it out for you. I do not own a gun, as I may be dangerous to myself and others. I have used a gun. I can state unequivocally I don't see myself shooting people, even those bleeps who bring 15 items to the 10 items or less cashier. Although, as an aside, does corn count as 1 item or 12? All that said, I would shoot a tyrant with malice afterthought. I guess that means government needs to keep me happy enough not to see it as tyrannical, either that or take away my Second Amendment rights or shoot me or both. The Second Amendment is my inalienable right to overthrow my government, and that they will have to pry from my cold dead hands. That's from Bob Healy, 2005 Motif magazine. That touches a soft spot with me. When I read that, I definitely, I could understand where he was coming from. Another issue here that I have is I was listening to testimony from the Coalition for Domestic Violence and the Protect Rhode Island Families Act. I testified on that bill multiple times in the Senate and in the House. And there was a exemption in there for law enforcement. I was extremely bothered by this. I felt that was a slap in the face to all gun owners. I mean, to tell me that an officer puts on a costume and can go to work and is automatically immune from mental illness, anger, or domestic violence is insane. And the fact that these groups who basically claim they're defending domestic violence victims would pander to a demographic that's 2 to 4 times likely to commit domestic violence is insane, in my opinion. And people voted for this, and everybody was happy, and it was basically, to me, a farce. That really bothered me, and everybody put on a big show for that legislation. It was a joke. One more thing I have to say is, having said all this, this is a little emotional for me, I cannot continue to allow my rights to be infringed. As a matter of principle, I cannot keep redrawing my line in the sand. I hope that government understands my position and understands why I cannot comply to demands to future enslave myself. Thank you.